I always knew I was different from the rest of my family, not in a rebellious way. I didn't drink or party or go chasing after dangerous ideas like some people assume when you say you're the black sheep. My difference was quieter, smaller, less noticeable to outsiders. But in my family, it was enough to make me stand out like a sore thumb. From the moment I was old enough to speak, my father had a clear plan for me. I was supposed to follow the Moreno legacy: law, finance, respectability. The Moreno name had stood for tradition in Savannah for decades. My grandfather built a respected law firm from nothing, and my father expanded it into one of the most powerful firms in the region. My siblings, of course, followed right behind him. My older brother took the fast track into corporate law. My younger sister married a partner from another prominent firm. Everything fit into the neat, polished picture my father always wanted. And then there was me. While my brother memorized legal cases and my sister perfected her networking skills, I sat in my room coding. I was 14 when I first taught myself how to build simple programs. It started as a curiosity, but it turned into a passion faster than I could even explain to anyone. Algorithms fascinated me. I could spend hours tweaking tiny lines of code, watching the patterns shift and change. The feeling of solving a problem through logic was addictive. It made sense in a way people didn't. But to my father, it was a waste of time. "You're wasting your talent, Callista," he told me once, his voice calm but firm. "All this computer nonsense, it won't take you anywhere real." I tried to explain. I really did. I told him about emerging fields. I told him about artificial intelligence and predictive analytics, how industries were changing, how tech companies were shaping the world. But he just smiled, that patient smile of his, like he was indulging a child's fantasy. "Real power," he said, "is built in rooms full of people who respect your name, not behind a computer screen." He meant well. Or at least, that's what I told myself back then. Maybe he thought he was protecting me. Or maybe he just couldn't see past the image he'd already created in his mind for what my life should look like. When it came time for college, I surprised him by getting into a top university on a partial scholarship for computer science. He still tried to steer me toward law. "You can minor in computer science," he suggested. "It'll be a nice skill to have as a corporate attorney." I didn't listen. Those 4 years were the first time I tasted real freedom. My world expanded in ways I couldn't have imagined before. I met people who thought like me. People who spoke the same language of logic, innovation, and endless possibility. I interned at tech companies, joined startup competitions, and worked late nights in the campus labs, building small products that most people would never see. It was exhausting and exhilarating all at once. But every holiday break brought me back to Savannah, back to the Moreno estate, where nothing had changed. Family dinners were always formal, always heavy with expectation. My father would smile politely when I mentioned my projects, then quickly shift the conversation to my brother's latest case or my sister's husband's promotion. "You'll settle eventually," he said once. "You'll see where true stability lies." I never argued anymore. What was the point? But deep inside, something was growing. A quiet resolve. After graduation, the job offers came in. Good offers too. Big names, big salaries, comfortable futures. My father was thrilled. He thought I'd finally seen the light. "You've made the right choice," he said proudly when I told him I'd received an offer from a major consulting firm. "See, the world rewards smart decisions." But I hadn't accepted it. Not yet, because there was something else I wanted to try first. It sounded insane, even to me at times, risky, unstable. But my gut wouldn't let it go. All through college, I'd been refining a prototype for an AI-powered analytics platform. Something that could help companies predict market trends, supply chain vulnerabilities, and consumer behaviors with more precision than anything out there. I believed in it, and I wanted to build it for real. When I told my father I was turning down the consulting job to start my own company, the silence was so sharp I could hear the clock ticking behind him. "You're throwing away everything," he finally said, his voice cold. "I'm building something, Dad." He shook his head slowly. You think you're smarter than everyone else, but this fantasy won't feed you. It won't give you security. It won't build you a life. I tried to explain again. The data models, the algorithms, the potential partnerships, but it was like speaking another language. You're choosing failure, Callista, he said quietly, and when it falls apart, don't expect me to clean up the mess. He didn't yell. My father rarely did. His disappointment cut much deeper than anger ever could. I left that night, feeling more alone than I ever had before. Austin became my new home. The city was vibrant, alive with startups, innovation, and energy I couldn't find back home. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment and set up my company, Neurolattice, out of a shared co-working space downtown. The first year was brutal. I maxed out my savings just getting the bare minimum of infrastructure. Developers were expensive. Cloud services were expensive. Legal fees, licenses, even office supplies. Everything chipped away at my tiny budget. I worked every waking hour, coding, pitching investors, refining models, fixing bugs, networking at every tech meetup I could find. But most investors didn't take me seriously. You're too young. We don't have enough market validation. Maybe if you had a male co-founder. I heard it all. There were nights I sat on my cheap futon staring at my laptop screen, wondering if my father had been right all along. And then came Leora. She was fresh out of grad school, full of energy and optimism that I had nearly lost by then. She saw potential in Neurolattice when even I was starting to doubt myself. She offered to help with operations, organization, pitches, anything to let me focus on building the product. I couldn't afford to pay her much at first, but she stayed. She believed in what we were doing. Slowly things started to shift. A mid-sized logistics company agreed to run a pilot program. Then a second client came on board. Our models predicted supply disruptions weeks before competitors even saw warning signs. The results were undeniable. Word spread. Leora became my anchor through the next 2 years of insane growth. Bigger clients signed on. Investors who once dismissed me started calling. Neurolattice grew from a cramped co-working space to a glass-walled office overlooking downtown Austin. And through it all, I never heard from my father. Not once. The distance grew wider with every passing holiday I missed. My mother would call sometimes, gentle as always, asking if I was eating well, if I was sleeping enough. My siblings barely mentioned me at all. But I didn't reach out either. I told myself I was too busy. But really, I didn't know what I'd even say. And then came the invitation. My father was hosting a grand dinner party to celebrate the expansion of the Moreno law firm. My brother had made partner. My sister's husband had been promoted again. It was, as always, a display of polished success. The card arrived in the mail like a formality. I almost didn't go, but something inside me whispered that maybe, after all this time, it was time. Walking back into my father's house after all those years felt both familiar and completely foreign. The tall white columns, the grand entrance, the polished marble floors. I knew every inch of this house. But I didn't belong to it anymore. The air inside was filled with that mix of expensive perfume and carefully practiced conversations. The kind of atmosphere where appearances mattered more than sincerity. As I stepped through the door, I saw my brother, Damien, near the staircase, laughing with one of my father's business partners. He looked exactly like my father always wanted him to be. Sharp suit, polished shoes, perfect posture. Damien saw me and offered a polite smile, but his eyes quickly shifted back to his conversation. My arrival didn't interrupt the flow of the evening at all. My sister, Vivian, approached me next. She hugged me lightly, more like someone greeting an acquaintance than a sibling. Her diamond earrings caught the light as she smiled. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, her voice sweet, but slightly sharp underneath. "I wasn't sure either," I replied softly. She glanced around. "Well, it's good you made it. Father's very proud of Damien tonight." I nodded. I heard, "Partner already, that's impressive." Vivian's smile widened as if she were accepting praise on Damien's behalf. That was always the dynamic between us. They were the shining stars, and I was the afterthought who made odd choices. I made my way toward the dining hall, where most of the guests had already gathered. The room was full of people in tailored suits and designer dresses, glasses of champagne floating effortlessly between conversations. My father stood near the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by partners and clients who all seemed eager to please him. He caught sight of me, and for a moment, his expression froze. Then he smiled, controlled and careful, as always. "Callista," he said as I approached, "you look well." "Thank you, Father. Congratulations on the firm's expansion." He nodded, accepting the compliment as though it was expected. "It's been a good year. Damien's done well." "That's wonderful," I said politely. "I'm happy for him." He studied me for a moment, as if searching for something in my face. Disappointment? Regret? Maybe even failure. Whatever he was looking for, I kept my expression steady. "And how is your little project these days?" he asked casually. "It's going well," I answered simply. "Still working from home? Or have you managed to move into a real office by now?" His voice carried that same tone he used for years, subtle but dismissive. "We have an office downtown," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "We?" I smiled. "I have a team now." He chuckled quietly, as though humoring me. "Well, every dream needs a few helpers, I suppose." I didn't respond. There was no point. The night wasn't about proving anything in that moment. I knew why I came. The moment would come later. Dinner was served, and the evening followed the familiar script. Speeches about the firm's legacy, toasts to success, clients offering praise and admiration. My father's voice carried easily across the room as he spoke of the firm's growth and his children's accomplishments. When Damien's promotion was mentioned, the applause was loud and genuine. My brother gave a modest speech, thanking everyone for their support. My sister's husband was praised for his recent deal that brought new international clients into the firm. I remained quiet through it all. I had grown used to being invisible at these gatherings. Finally, as dessert was served, my father stood again, glass in hand. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, his voice calm and steady. "It's been a remarkable year for the firm, for our family, and for the future of our legacy." He paused, scanning the room with pride. "We are a family built on hard work, discipline, and smart choices. Choices that bring stability and success. My children have made me very proud, each of them in their own way." He glanced briefly in my direction, but didn't linger. "Some choices, of course, are more practical than others," he added, with a soft chuckle that rippled through the room. A few guests smiled, some even laughed lightly. I knew exactly who that remark was aimed at. I kept my face neutral, but inside, something tightened. Not anger, not anymore, just a quiet awareness of how little had changed in his mind. As the dinner wound down, people began mingling again, moving from the dining room to the sitting areas. Conversations turned more casual. Deals were quietly discussed in corners of the room. Old family friends commented on my siblings' latest accomplishments. No one asked much about me. Until my father approached again. "Callista," he said, voice lower now, more private. "I hope you enjoyed the evening." "I did. Thank you for inviting me." He gave a polite smile. "You know, it's not too late. You have the education, the name. You could still join the firm. I'm sure we could find a role for you, something stable." His offer wasn't out of kindness. It was a veiled admission that he still thought I'd eventually admit defeat. I smiled gently. "I appreciate that, Father, but I'm doing well where I am." He sighed softly, as though I was still a child refusing to listen to reason. "It's not about pride, Callista," he said. "It's about security, stability, family. All this," he gestured around the room. "This is what lasts." I nodded quietly. "I know, I respect what you've built." He patted my shoulder, almost condescendingly. "You'll see, in time." I glanced over my shoulder and saw Leora standing patiently near the entrance. She caught my eye and gave a small nod. It was time. "Actually, Father," I said gently, There's something I'd like to show you. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh? I gestured for Leora to come over. She approached calmly, holding a slim folder in her hand. My father looked slightly amused. What's this? He asked. A contract, I answered. One of our latest partnerships. He opened the folder and began reading. At first, his face was casual. Then his eyes narrowed. His hands froze briefly as he scanned the numbers. $950 million. Projected royalties beyond $2 billion. The partnering institution, a major investment bank that even his law firm had long tried to court as a client. He blinked slowly, rereading the page as though the numbers might change. The room seemed to quiet around us, though no one else knew what was happening. This is real? He asked, his voice tighter now. I nodded. Yes, Neural Lattice has been doing well. He swallowed hard, still staring at the contract. We signed last week, I added softly. The product is scaling globally. Multiple industries have signed long-term licensing agreements. He looked up at me, the first flicker of genuine shock crossing his face. For once, there was no prepared speech, no lecture, just silence. I didn't want to interrupt your evening, I said gently. But since you were curious about where my project stood, I thought you might like to see. He closed the folder slowly, his hand resting on it as though grounding himself. I waited quietly, not pressing, not boasting, just letting the truth sit there between us. The weight of all the years between us hung in that moment. The dismissals, the doubt, the quiet distance. He finally exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. I see. I smiled softly. I hope you do. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing left to say. The weeks after that dinner felt different. Not much was said between me and my father after the contract reveal. He didn't call, he didn't email, but the silence carried a weight that was new. It wasn't the usual absence of interest I'd grown used to. This was something else entirely. It was the absence of control. For years, my father had believed I was simply a stubborn child playing at something outside my depth. Now, for the first time, he had no clear place to put me in his world. I was neither failure nor disappointment. I was something unfamiliar. Success had a strange way of changing how people saw you. The rest of the family, of course, began reaching out. Vivienne texted me a few days later. She never asked about my business before, but now she was curious. Hey, heard you're doing really well. Maybe we could catch up sometime? Would love to hear more. Damien sent a short message, polite but distant, congratulating me on the deal. My mother, always the gentlest of all of them, called and asked if I was eating well. She didn't mention the contract. She never had to. I could hear the quiet pride in her voice even without the words. In Austin, my world kept moving forward. Neural Lattice was growing faster than even I anticipated. Leora was now managing a team of new hires. We signed 2 additional contracts within the next quarter. The company was reaching a scale that required an entirely new level of management, strategy, and structure. It was everything I had dreamed about building. Yet, something inside me remained unsettled. Success hadn't erased the years of being dismissed, the endless subtle ways my family had treated me like an afterthought. The wounds were still there, even as my reality shifted. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Leora entered my office, her expression more serious than usual. You have a meeting request, she said carefully. From your father. I looked up from my screen. My father? She nodded. He wants to meet. He said it's about a potential business matter. I leaned back in my chair, processing her words. This wasn't a social visit. This wasn't about family. This was about business. For the first time in my life, my father was coming to me. I agreed to the meeting, more curious than anything else. We scheduled it for the following week at my office in Austin. No grand estate, no polished dinner party. Just my office, my company, my world. When the day arrived, I saw him walk into the building's lobby from my office window. He looked slightly out of place in his tailored suit amid the casual energy of the tech world. People here wore jeans, carried laptops, moved fast. The air was filled with quiet focus, not polished small talk. Leora greeted him at reception and led him to my office. He stepped inside, glancing around with a polite but assessing gaze. The glass walls, the collaborative workspaces, the data visualization screens, it was all foreign territory for him. "Callista," he said, offering his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Of course," I replied, shaking his hand lightly. "Please, have a seat." He settled into the chair across from me, his movements careful, measured. "I must say your office is impressive," he started. "Thank you." He paused as if choosing his words carefully. "I've been following the news, your recent contracts, the growth projections. It's very impressive. Very impressive." I nodded slightly. "We've been fortunate. And we've worked hard." He cleared his throat softly, his hands resting on the armrests. "Our firm," he continued, "has been experiencing some shifts in client portfolios. The legal landscape is changing rapidly, as you probably know." I said nothing, allowing him to continue. "We're looking to expand our service offerings, diversify. Many of our clients are requesting more advanced data analysis, predictive modeling, risk assessments. That sort of thing." Now I understood. He wasn't here to reconcile. He was here because his firm— "I appreciate you reaching out, Father, and I'm open to discussing possibilities, but I want to be clear. This would be a business arrangement, strictly professional." "Of course," he said quickly. "I wouldn't expect otherwise." The conversation that followed was one I never imagined having with him. We spoke numbers, integration strategies, intellectual property protections. I answered his questions directly, professionally. Leora took notes, occasionally clarifying terms. At one point he paused, glancing around my office again. "You've built something remarkable, Callista." There was no condescension in his voice this time, just quiet acknowledgement. I nodded. "Thank you." When the meeting ended, we stood. He extended his hand again. "I'll have my legal team draft a preliminary proposal," he said. "I'll review it with my team," I replied. As he turned to leave, he stopped at the door, looking back at me. "I never saw this coming," he admitted quietly. "You've proven me wrong." I smiled softly. "I didn't build this to prove anything, Father, but I'm glad you see it now." He nodded once, then left. The door closed behind him, leaving me standing in the office I built with my own hands. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I simply felt free. The need for his approval no longer weighed on me. I had found my own place, my own success, and finally, my own peace. The contract between Neurolatis and my father's firm was finalized within a month. His legal team handled the paperwork, and my own legal counsel reviewed every clause carefully. Everything about it was professional, straightforward, and clean. But underneath the legal language, I knew what the contract really represented. It was the moment where the dynamic between me and my father finally shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the child trying to earn his respect. I wasn't the daughter hoping for his approval. I was a business partner he needed. The partnership brought new clients to Neurolatis almost immediately. My father's firm had an extensive network of high-profile clients who were eager to gain access to our predictive models. It opened doors we hadn't even planned for yet, but every new opportunity came with its own set of complications. I started spending more time on planes than at home. Meetings with venture capitalists, corporate partners, regulatory boards. Our team doubled in size within 6 months. Leora managed the growing staff with incredible focus, but even she admitted that the pace was exhausting. Late one evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings, I sat in my office alone. The city lights of Austin blinked softly through the glass walls, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to breathe. This was everything I had worked for, but it was also far more than I had ever imagined. Success brought a kind of pressure that few people talked about. The responsibility was constant. The stakes were higher. Every decision had consequences. I hesitated. The thought of returning to the estate again brought back old memories, but something inside me told me to say yes. "I'll be there," I replied. When the day arrived, I flew into Savannah early in the morning. The house looked the same as always, but this time it didn't intimidate me. I walked through the familiar halls with steady steps. The family was gathered in the dining room when I arrived. My mother greeted me first, pulling me into a gentle hug. Vivienne smiled politely. Damien gave a short nod. My father sat at the head of the table, as always. When I entered, he stood up, meeting me halfway. "Callista," he said. His voice was calm, not formal, not distant, just simple. "Happy birthday, Father," I said, handing him a small box. He opened it slowly. Inside was a limited edition fountain pen, classic, elegant, and engraved with his initials. His eyes softened slightly as he ran his fingers over the inscription. "Thank you," he said quietly. Dinner was relaxed compared to past gatherings. The conversations were lighter, less about accomplishments, more about small updates on everyone's lives. My siblings still spoke about their work, their children, their travels. But for once, there was no undertone of competition. At one point, Vivienne turned to me. "I saw neurolatis mentioned in Forbes again last week," she said. "That's becoming a regular thing now." I smiled. "We've been fortunate. It's amazing what you've built, Callista," she added, and for the first time, her voice didn't carry that thin layer of passive judgment. It sounded genuine. Even Damien chimed in. "A few colleagues have been asking me about your predictive models. They're very impressed." I nodded, appreciating the change in tone. Small steps, but they mattered. After dinner, my father asked me to join him in his study. The room hadn't changed. Mahogany shelves lined with thick legal volumes, old paintings on the walls, the scent of aged paper and polished wood. We sat across from each other, a quiet understanding hanging between us. "I want to say something I should have said a long time ago," he began, his voice steady. "I was wrong about you." I listened, not interrupting. I thought I knew what was best. I thought that following tradition was the safest path. But I see now that your path required more courage than I ever gave you credit for. His words hung there, weighty and sincere. "You built something extraordinary, Callista, and you did it without me. That takes strength." I took a breath, letting the moment settle before speaking. "I didn't want to shut you out," I said softly. "I just needed the space to find my own way." He nodded slowly. "And you did." There was no grand apology, no dramatic reconciliation, just two people finally seeing each other as they were. Before I left that evening, my father walked me to the door himself. "I hope we can find ways to work together more in the future," he said. "I think we can," I replied, offering a small smile. As I drove away from the estate, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because I no longer carried the weight of trying to earn something that was never mine to force. I had built my own name, and that was enough. After that evening at my father's house, things between us shifted into something I had never expected. We didn't become suddenly close, and I didn't expect that either. But we found a rhythm. A kind of mutual respect started to take shape, even if it was fragile at first. The partnership between Neurolatis and his firm continued smoothly. Our teams worked well together. There were regular calls, strategy sessions, and occasional face-to-face meetings where my father and I interacted like any two professionals. No longer as a father trying to lecture his daughter. Just two people running businesses that had found value in working together. It felt strange sometimes. The man who had once doubted my every decision now deferred to my expertise in boardrooms. He asked questions instead of giving advice. He listened when I explained how our algorithms worked, how the predictive models were evolving, how the market was responding. Slowly, his tone shifted from cautious skepticism to genuine curiosity. There was one meeting that stayed with me even more than the others. We were sitting in a conference room with his senior partners, reviewing a new client's request for advanced risk assessments. My father glanced at one of his longtime colleagues, then looked at me. "Callista," he said, "how would you approach this scenario? The client is concerned about long-term market volatility." I pulled up our latest model projections, walking them through the data. The partners nodded, impressed with the clarity and depth of our insights. When the meeting ended, one of his senior partners approached me privately. "Your father speaks very highly of you," he said. "We've been working together for 20 years. I don't think I've ever seen him speak about anyone's work quite like this." I thanked him politely, but inside, those words settled somewhere deep. Not because I needed validation, but because I never thought I would hear that from anyone close to my father. Back in Austin, the growth continued. Leora had taken on a larger role as COO, managing the daily operations with incredible precision. The staff had grown to over 100 employees. We moved into a larger office space overlooking the river. The company was becoming more than just a startup. We were now being invited to tech conferences as industry leaders, not just newcomers. One afternoon, as I walked through the office, watching teams collaborate on new projects, Leora caught up with me. "You know, you haven't taken a real break in, well, forever," she said, half teasing. I smiled. "There's always something new coming up." "I know," she said, "but you've built something that's not going anywhere. You can afford to take a breath once in a while." Her words stayed with me longer than I expected. The truth was, for years I had been running. Running to build. Running to prove. Running to stay ahead of the fear that if I paused, everything might fall apart. But now, maybe I didn't need to run like that anymore. A few days later, I booked a short trip, not far. Just a few days away, somewhere quiet. No meetings, no presentations, no emails. When I returned, I felt different. Calmer. More grounded. Shortly after I got back, I received another unexpected phone call from my father. "Would you like to have lunch?" he asked. We met at a small restaurant halfway between Savannah and Atlanta. Neutral ground. The conversation started lightly. Weather, travel, harmless topics. And he grew more thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about the way I handled things with you," he said, carefully choosing his words. "I wanted you to follow a path I understood. I thought I was protecting you." I nodded, letting him continue. "I realize now that I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting my own comfort, my own way of seeing the world." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. "I know," I said softly. He exhaled. "You didn't need my approval, Callista. You never did. But for what it's worth, I'm proud of you." There was no dramatic pause, no heavy tears, just a simple, honest statement. "Thank you," I replied. "That means more than you know." As we finished lunch, I saw something in him I hadn't seen before. A kind of quiet humility, maybe even peace. After that, our conversations became easier. Less about business, more about life. He asked about my travels, my interests outside of work, even about the people I surrounded myself with. I asked him questions too, learning things about his early career that I had never known. The walls that stood between us for so long began to fade. In many ways, I realized that the real success wasn't in the contracts or the revenue or the public recognition. It was in this quiet rebuilding of a relationship that had once felt impossible to repair. The company kept growing, but I didn't feel like I was carrying the same weight I once did. I had built something strong, something that no longer needed to be driven by old wounds. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my Austin apartment, looking out over the city, I allowed myself to feel what I had rarely let in before. Contentment. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to my father, not to my family, not even to myself. I had found my place, and that was enough. Months passed, and with each one, the distance that once existed between me and my father shrank a little more. It wasn't forced or rushed. We simply found a new way to exist alongside each other. There was a moment that stood out to me more than any contract or partnership ever could. One morning, my phone rang. It was my father. "I'm in Austin for a few days," he said. "If you're free, I'd like to see your office, if that's all right." It was such a simple request, but it carried a weight I felt immediately. This wasn't about business, this was personal. "Of course," I said. "I'd love to give you a tour." When he arrived, Leora greeted him in the lobby. He shook her hand politely, greeting her by name. She had met him a few times before at joint meetings, but this felt different. There was a softness to his demeanor I hadn't seen before. As I walked him through the open workspaces, introducing him to various team leads and departments, he listened closely, asked thoughtful questions, and took in every detail. He studied the whiteboards filled with diagrams, watched the engineers debugging complex models, and nodded as Leora explained how different divisions collaborated. "This is quite something," he said after a while. "It's more than I imagined." I smiled. "It's grown a lot." When we reached the main conference room, I pulled back the glass door and gestured for him to step inside. "This is where we hold most of our executive planning meetings," I explained. He paused, looking around. The city skyline stretched behind the glass walls, and the long table was surrounded by digital displays showing live data models. He turned toward me and said quietly, "I never thought I'd be standing here." Neither did I, and yet here we were. We sat down at the table, and for a moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the city outside. "You know," he said finally, "when you were a child, I thought I knew exactly who you were supposed to become. I thought I was protecting you by guiding you toward what I believed was right." He paused, searching for the right words. "But I see now that what I was really afraid of was watching you take risks I couldn't control, risks I wouldn't have had the courage to take myself." I listened quietly, letting him speak at his own pace. "You did something I couldn't do," he continued. "You stepped into uncertainty, you built something new, and you did it entirely on your own terms." I swallowed softly, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't expected. "I made mistakes," he added. "I see that now, and I want you to know how deeply I respect what you've done." There was a vulnerability in his voice I had never heard before. "Thank you, Father," I said gently. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders loosening. "You've built something lasting, Callista, and you've become someone I'm proud to call my daughter." I smiled. "That means a lot." The rest of the visit was light. He met more of the team, toured additional departments, and even joked with a few junior staff members. When he finally left that afternoon, I walked him to the elevator. As the doors opened, he turned to me one last time. "You're leading this world now," he said, "and I'll follow wherever you take it." The elevator doors closed, leaving me standing there, feeling something I had waited a lifetime to feel. Not approval, but understanding. The next few months were some of the most stable I had experienced in years. Neurolatis was no longer in its fragile growth phase. We had reached a place where sustainability was no longer a question. My leadership team had matured. Leora had taken full control of operations, and I finally allowed myself to step back from the daily grind. One evening, Leora invited me to join her for coffee at a small shop not far from the office. "You've changed, you know," she said as we sat by the window. "In what way?" I asked, curious. "You're lighter," she said. "You're not carrying that same weight you used to." I smiled. She was right. For so long, everything I did was driven by the need to prove myself, to escape the constant feeling of being underestimated. But that part of me no longer controlled my decisions. "I finally feel settled," I admitted. She nodded. "You deserve it." We sipped our coffee in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker outside. As I looked out into the night, I thought about the long road that brought me here. The years of doubt, struggle, isolation. The quiet determination that pushed me forward when no one else believed. The bittersweet reconciliation with my father. The new respect between us. It wasn't a perfect story, but it was mine. And that, I realized, was more than enough. As Neurolatis moved into its next phase, I found myself reflecting more often on everything that had unfolded over the years. Not out of regret, but out of quiet gratitude for the journey itself. There was one more moment, though, that would bring this chapter of my life full circle. Several months after my father's visit to Austin, I received a formal invitation in the mail. My father's law firm was hosting its annual partner retreat, but this time it wasn't just about business. They were celebrating the firm's 50th anniversary, a milestone for the Moreno name and for him personally. The event was being held at one of the most prestigious hotels in Atlanta, with clients, partners, and family invited. A grand affair, as was tradition. For the first time, my name was listed on the formal invitation under distinguished family guests. I debated whether to attend. Not because of anger. I had long moved past that. But because I knew what this event symbolized for my father. It was his life's work on display. But Leora encouraged me gently. "You've earned your place in that room," she said. "Not because of him, because of you." I decided to go. The ballroom was filled with hundreds of people when I arrived. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above polished floors, and soft classical music filled the air as waiters moved between guests with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. As I entered, a few familiar faces from my father's firm greeted me politely. There was no longer that faint judgment in their eyes, just polite, respectful acknowledgement. My father saw me from across the room and approached with a warm smile. "I'm glad you're here," he said genuinely. "Thank you for inviting me." He gestured to the room. It means a great deal to me, but having you here tonight means more than any of this." We spoke easily for a while, moving through small clusters of guests together. He introduced me to several longtime colleagues and even a few clients who had become familiar with Neurolattice through our partnership. At one point during the evening, the firm's managing partners invited my father to the stage to deliver a speech. As expected, he spoke with ease, graceful, composed, proud. He reflected on the firm's long history, its challenges, its triumphs. Then, near the end of his remarks, he did something I never anticipated. "I've spoken often about legacy tonight," he said, "about how we build something that outlasts us. But legacies aren't always built by following the same path. Sometimes, they're built when someone has the courage to forge a new one entirely." He paused, his eyes scanning the room before landing gently on me. "My daughter Callista is here tonight. Many of you know of her accomplishments in a very different field. She has built something extraordinary, on her own terms, with her own vision. And in doing so, she has taught me as much as I ever hoped to teach her." The room grew still, and for a moment, it felt like all the years that had led to this were condensed into those few simple words. "I'm deeply proud of her," he concluded, his voice steady but full. The applause that followed was polite, but for me, it wasn't about the audience's reaction. It was about hearing him finally say it, not behind closed doors, but openly. After the speech, several guests approached me with kind words and congratulations. I smiled, engaging in polite conversations, but my mind kept returning to my father's words. Later that night, as the crowd began to thin, I found a quiet spot on a balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, and for a moment, I closed my eyes and let the breeze wash over me. It wasn't vindication I felt. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. All the years of trying to be seen, trying to be heard, it had led to this quiet understanding. I didn't need my father's approval anymore, but hearing it sincerely meant something I hadn't expected. It was never about proving him wrong. It was about becoming whole on my own terms. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "You all right?" my father asked as he stepped onto the balcony. I smiled. "I'm more than all right." He stood beside me, looking out at the skyline. We didn't speak for a while. We didn't need to. Finally, he said softly, "You've built your own world, Callista, and you've done it with grace." I turned to him, my voice gentle. "You've built something lasting too, Father, just in a different way." He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I saw not the stern father who once tried to mold me, but simply a man, flawed, learning, growing. We stood there quietly, not as opponents, not as a father and daughter defined by years of distance, but simply as two people who had finally found